Hi, my name is Matthew Bellisario. Welcome to another edition of the Bellisariosonic YouTube channel from the outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama. Today, a fun video for me, just kind of a discussion on what I consider to be the golden age for the reissue regarding vinyl records. And what prompted me to do this video, and this is more of a discussion video, but I want you guys to participate and leave your comments. This is one of those fun videos. I'm going to play a couple tracks for you as well, as I like to do. I like to play records for you guys, but in the context of the development of the LP, which is something that those of us who collect records may or may not have contemplated how things have changed over the years regarding the long playing record. And what kind of has got me on this kick is reading this new book called At the Vanguard of Vinyl. I definitely recommend this if you're into record collecting, for those of you out there, by Darren Mueller. Fantastic book so far. I'm about halfway through it. But basically it gets into the cultural history of the LP. And what's interesting is even though the LP came out in 1948, Columbia, were the ones that developed it, it really didn't take off until the mid-50s. And really 1955 was kind of this pivotal year where a lot of things began to really come into its own regarding the long playing record. And he goes into details in this book. But it's very interesting because there's a couple of things that the LP, it took some time for the record companies to figure out how to best utilize the LP versus, of course, the predominant 78 records that had been the only thing pretty much that they'd had up until that point to sell records. And so, you know, all the Louis Armstrongs for jazz, classical pieces and things like that had to be in albums, multiple sides to cover one classical piece. And jazz really hasn't, up until the LP, hadn't really had a large market share in record sales. And even though you had, you know, some popular artists like Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Benny Goodman and things like that, you know, all of those, although they sold well, the limitations of the 78 were really more pronounced with classical music. Because you could put a short pop song, 3-minute pop song on a 78 and put an album of those together, and, you know, you could listen to several pop songs, you know, one per side. But with a classical record, you had that limitation of space. But what hadn't been realized was the other ways that you could utilize the LP. This bringing to my point of reissues, which right now is the at the highest point it's probably ever been. But in my estimation, we've gone through this cycle a couple of times. First around the early 50s, mid 50s, when all of the records, such as, I've got a couple sitting around here, the Louis Armstrong, right, Hot Fives, Hot Sevens, these were all reissues when they came out. Better fidelity, they came out on the LP. You didn't have to have, you know, 7 or 8 78s to listen to all your favorite songs. You could have 2 LPs now and have them all on here, and they sounded better than ever. And the records wore a lot better. You didn't have to have all those heavy styluses on those 78s that you had to change the needle out every single side that you were supposed to do to keep from wearing your records out, which a lot of people didn't do. And as a result, you had a lot of crappy sounding 78s very quickly. They wore the records down. But when you got to these, technology changed, and now you had less tracking weight needed on your stylus. And things, of course, developed from this point onward to where now, you know, your records last a lot longer than they did back then. But the big high point of this was also reissues. And so that they reissued large, you know, a lot of the catalog of the 78s for jazz records and everything else. And that was a large part of record sales back then, was producing all these, Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, Louis Armstrong, all these different big selling artists. Now we're going to repackage these and resell them, and they're better sounding than ever. Then you kind of went through that again when the CD came out, right? You had the whole reissue craze when the CDs got going. It took, again, a few years after the CDs came out for people to start utilizing. We have more space on the CD now. We can put bonus tracks on there, so we can have all the extra takes that we never heard before. You got that with, for example, the one of the greatest classic examples is the Duke Ellington Newport 1958. The live record, that was another development from the LP. You didn't have live jazz records up until that point, really, until the LP came out. Once the LP came out, you could record a classic performance live, right? Even though this was pretty heavily edited, a lot of different things went into making this record. And of course, when you got this on CD, which contains all the tracks and all the takes and the unedited introduction and all kinds of things, and you hear a completely different experience on this than what you got on the original LP. And so you had this whole big resurgence of the reissues with the CDs. I know a lot of record collectors out there like to put down the CD format. I'm not one of those people. Do I think it's better than vinyl? No, but it had its advantages for mobility, for example. This was the greatest thing ever when these came out, to have in your car and be able to not have your tape getting wound up in the tape player and everything else. I couldn't wait to get rid of cassette tapes. And you had the advantage of now you could, all the bonus tracks and all the reissues and all those things came out, and that was kind of cool. So this was, I think, it was a big deal, a big development in recorded music, the CD. A lot of people like to downplay the CD again. I think it was very significant. And really, this leads to my point about the reissue craze that we're in now with vinyl records, right? We wouldn't have gotten this. This is a continuation of this, really, because you have now all the everything together, all the takes, everything that was done here on this, right? You don't have to buy it in individuals or volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, etc. And then, depending on what you're picking up, you may have tracks that were never available before on record now. So right now, I think my argument is that we're at this golden age of the reissue right now. The record companies have no other way of making a lot of money except for the rights that they have on all this pre-recorded music, because with rare exceptions like the Taylor Swift phenomenon, which I'm still trying to figure out, they're not selling a lot of new music on record. Most of it is legacy recordings. So the Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, all the classic rock stuff. Even some of the 80s stuff is coming back into vogue now with people buying reissues of that stuff. So you had a lot of development in the LP, but now I think we're coming back around to this new, in a sense, new respect for high fidelity recordings now that are being remastered just for those who are listening to vinyl record. And that's, again, another unique thing that really we haven't seen since the 50s, when that's all you had. Because once the CD came out, you had, and then now with streaming, cassette tape, 8-track tape, there's the old joke, how many times did I buy, one of the Beatles albums? I bought the record, I bought the cassette, I bought the 8-track, I bought the CD, I bought the remastered CD with the extra tracks. Now I bought the new vinyl remaster with the extra. Anyway, it goes on and on. But I think this is probably going to be the golden age for the reissue, and I don't see it getting any better for legacy recordings than what we have right now, in my estimation. And I don't know how long it will last. Right now, I think we're getting blasted with so much of it because the record companies have this opportunity to make a lot of money. And they're going to utilize any of these legacy recordings that they think can sell. And this is something that's really fortunate for those of us who grew up with all those great analog recordings, and you've got guys that appreciate music like Chad Kassem over at Acoustic Sounds, right? Guys like this that are true fans of music that are going back and able to get these analog tapes, remaster them, and give us the best sound that we've ever gotten, even improving on what was done on the originals many times. And I think, again, that's because they're making them for us, for people that are sitting there listening to them on their stereo at home, and they don't have to worry about fudging, having to do a happy medium for radio play, for example, like you would have had to do back in the 70s and the 80s, that you would have had to master that record so that, you know, for the most part, you could play it at home and it sounded decent, but also you had to take it to the radio station and play it over the air, and it had to sound somewhat decent there. So I think from what I read in these different books and hear from different mastering engineers, a lot of times you're looking for that happy medium, and maybe you didn't get as good as you could have gotten had it been mixed and mastered, or mastered for just your home stereo on a nice set of speakers, right? You had to sound good over the radio, had to sound decent in your car. Which brings me to my next point on modern recordings that are being put on record don't sound the best a lot of times because they're looking for that quote unquote happy medium where you can stream it and it sounds good on your phone and in your earbuds and it's streaming in your car, and therefore they're not going to give you a separate master a lot of times, or even a separate mix for your home stereo. And I think when they do that, we're very fortunate. So I want to play a couple of tunes. First of all, I'm just talking about the development of the vinyl record. This is a pretty cool record, Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet. And I really didn't realize how unique this was until I was reading this book, and it talks about the very beginning of this record. I'm going to play it for you so you guys can hear it, because this is something unique that was done because of the format that they had to work with in recording in the studio. They can do things a little bit different that hadn't been done before. So listen to the beginning of this here.
I'll play it and tell you what it is later.
So you get that Miles Davis talking over the beginning of the tune, right? In the studio. That was done on purpose, left there on purpose, in order to give the listener this unique experience of these jazz guys in the studio, a personal experience. There are several different marketing techniques used by the record companies here. Prestige giving us an informal, almost personal look into the studio. Miles Davis, saying that over it. And that happened several times. Prestige would do that when you'd hear Miles talking in the background or something. They'd also leave mistakes on these records, quote unquote mistakes, where they do a couple of takes and maybe you'd have the ending wasn't quite what it was supposed to be. They left those on there sometimes in order to give a unique experience. These are professional jazz musicians working things out, playing, improvising in the studio, and you hear this. It was marketed, it was in a lot of the notes, the liner notes a lot of times on these records. They would use that for marketing. But now, getting back to my point of these new reissues, how now we are utilizing, being able to give us this best sounding version of 90125 ever in my, in my estimation, from your comments out there. And a lot of people have commented that have different original versions, say this sounds far better than any of the original copies. So I think that this is something unique, something special. I think when we're talking about being oversaturated with a lot of these reissues, and it seems like that's the case, that there's so many of them that we can't keep up, especially those of us that have a wide listening palette for different genres. Me, I'll buy classic rock, I'll buy rhythm and blues, I'll buy jazz, I'll buy classic rock, I'll buy heavy metal, some of that stuff, classical music. So I'm very, there's a lot of people out there like that are buying multiple genres, and it gets to be where you can't keep up with them all. You can't buy them all unless you're, you know, a multimillionaire. But I think that one of the cool things is you can focus now, especially if you've been collecting records for a long time like I have. For newcomers, it might be a bit intimidating. I can see that because there's so much out there now. And even though record sales are nowhere near what they were around 1979, 1980, it is the highest it's been probably since around, 1989, when, and after that it just dropped off. Right around 1989, 1990, record sales were down to under 30 million. And right now we're probably at somewhere around 50 million records sold a year. And just to give you an idea, at the height in around 1978, 79, they were at around 350 million records being sold per year. So we're a long way from there. But I think with the people that are new, that are buying records, it could be a bit intimidating because there's so much. Now, and that, of course, younger people are buying different music than maybe some of us my age are buying. Especially younger females that are buying Taylor Swift records and Dua Lipa and all these different people, that those are very collectible for a lot of these young kids. But I do know some people in their 20s that are going and they're buying, Black Sabbath, or they're buying a lot of these classic rock records, heavy metal records. Some are getting into jazz. Well, when you look back at the catalog that they have to pick from with all these reissues, it can be pretty daunting to trying to figure out what you're going to purchase. And I think that's is a good thing, and also a hurdle to be overcome for some people. For people my age that have been collecting and have a large record collection, it's really something that's, I think, is really cool, because we've got a lot to pick from. Even if we have the originals, we have to decide whether or not we're going to want to buy the latest remaster. But there's a lot of stuff out there that was not available before, especially regarding like the jazz genre, that you could not get. It just wasn't available. And now those are better sounding than they've ever been as well. So from where I look at it, I think right now we're fortunate to be where we are. And I don't think it will last. I really don't. I think this is a cycle. I think that we take advantage of this while we can, because I think once the people that are my age are gone, I mean, we're looking at people 50s and above for the most part that have really pushed this. And of course, again, the record companies recognizing that they can make money while they can on these legacy recordings. And a lot of the good music will stand the test of time. I'm not saying that it won't, but I think that digital technology is going to keep getting better. And that's another point that I want to make. If you get some of these remastered Marillion or Jethro Tull box sets that have 5.1 mixes, or improved stereo mixes with the high bit rates, they sound very good. And when I listen to them on my living room stereo, some of them sound very close to the warmness that you get on a record. It really is very close. And one thing you don't, of course, have with the digital technology is imperfections in the record that you'll always have. You can never get rid of that. As great as these acoustic sounds albums are, and I love them, that's why I do these videos, and as quiet as they are, a lot of times there'll be one little imperfection somewhere, or dust gets on. You got to make sure they're clean, more maintenance. And that's all part of the fun of it for a lot of us, is taking it out, wiping off the record, putting it on, making sure everything's clean, your turntable set up. That's all part of the fun of it for me. But for those people that are looking for a good sonic experience, that don't want to have to deal with that, these new box sets that are coming out, digital box sets with all these remasters in these different digital formats, and a lot of times you have the original mix and a new mix, or two different remasters on there, and they're at high bit rate. You can listen to them. There's a place in the in the music collector's library for that stuff, in my opinion. So I'm not just a a record collector. I'm a music collector. That's what I look at myself as. And to me, the music is the most important part of it. But the format of the vinyl record is certainly special for me. The presentation, the sound, of course, there is a unique analog sound to the record of that. You know, the stylus playing on the record, and the warm sound and the resonant sound of the drums and everything. So there's something to be said for that, of course. But I do recommend this book because it's just got me thinking and goes into the different developments of the LP. You know, you had the development of the live recording, and this focuses on jazz here, but talks about the development of the live record, how different, you know, how George Avakian, for example, thought about doing that Ellington record, how he decided to market it, how the studio recordings changed, how imperfections were allowed to exist in the records, or talking on the record in the studio, how historical documentation was looked at in the LP now, that there was a documentation of this particular recording date for the jazz artist and when these guys got together and made this recording. And that kind of became what was focused on. So this focuses more on the jazz side of things, but it's interesting because just talking about how long, first of all, 1948 is when the LP came out, and there was different formats. 10-inch format, which was popular, was the same size as 78, and they looked at it from a marketing standpoint. You had the extended play 45s that came out, and of course the whole speed wars between RCA Victor and Columbia, and then the meeting of minds in order for RCA to go ahead and adopt the LP, and for Columbia and other people picked up the 45 for singles. And it's interesting how these different phases in recording, you know, when you go look at how everything developed, and especially with the LP, and how I think, you know, really things developed. You had in classic rock the development of these concept records rather than a bunch of singles being put on a record like you would have. Now you can actually have this cohesive several pieces of music going across two sides of a 33 RPM record, right? And they weren't necessarily something that were just a group of singles. They could be a concept record where they all kind of flowed into one another, and you got, you know, the Beatles and the Pink Floyd and all that kind of stuff. So I think, you know, it's interesting how the LP had this development of what you could do with it, and how that was carried on with the CD and even expanded further with that whole idea of fitting extra tracks and all this kind of stuff. And then getting now to the point where we're back at this place where we're going to reissue all these classic albums that a lot of them now that are being brought out that weren't classics. They weren't, some of these jazz albums that Blue Note's putting out some of them were not very popular. They didn't sell well. And now they're being repackaged, being remarketed as, you know, this hidden gem that really wasn't appreciated in the past. Now it's been remastered for the first time from the original analog tapes, and it's marketing. And the record companies have done this from the beginning. And that's what this book is really kind of points out and gets you thinking about things like this. It really just got me thinking about where we are with record collecting right now and what cycle we're in. And really we're in the cycle of what I say is the golden age of the reissue. The acoustic sounds, the jazz, the classic rock stuff, all the stuff being brought in from the analog tapes made especially for record the best that they can sound. And that's, I think, where we're at now. And I would say this is probably, I'm guessing that this is going to last for another decade or so. I really think that this is going to last for another maybe 10 years, where they're going to keep digging out these analog tapes and remastering and putting out these different sets and these different things. And I think that after about a decade, this cycle is going to drop off and probably come to an end. And at that point, I would think, again, this is all conjecture, but I think that the focus on the physical aspect of the digital side of things is going to come back with even more of an expansion. In other words, what we're getting with like the Jethro Tull and the Marillion, I use those as examples because those two catalogs are being reissued with those box sets with all those DVD, all the high fidelity or Blu-ray, along with documentaries and things like that. I think that that's really only in its infancy stage because there's not very many people doing it yet. Those earbooks, you know, the big album size with the Blu-rays in them and the multiple CDs or DVDs. I think for me, I think the CD is really a thing of the past. I really think that the DVD or just the Blu-ray will be what takes over for physical format. But I think the record companies recognize the need to have a physical copy of music, and I think that hasn't been fully tapped yet. So I think we're going to go from this reissue legacy boom here that we have. I think we'll still maybe have that, but it's going to be in a different format. I think you're going to have a lot of these packages that are going to be even more, they're going to have better booklets. They're going to have better things that are going to be presented in a digital format with different multiple masters, and maybe even more documentaries on the making of these things. But that's just my thoughts on this. But I do recommend picking this book up. And again, I buy all this stuff myself. I'm not promoting this book because it was given to me. It's a lot of good information in here. Really gets you thinking just about the development of technology in recorded music and the different things that record companies looked at utilizing in order to sell records. And I think that that's more prevalent now than ever, especially when it comes to these reissues and how good they sound and how you can turn around and sell a record again, how many times over. You know, like I said, you had the original record, you had cassette, you had 8-track, you had CD, you had the remastered CDs with the extra tracks. Now we're coming back and we're getting new reissues from the original analog tapes, sounding better than ever. So we're at, you know, the end. We're at the high point right now, I'd say, of this boom, this legacy boom with all these remasters. And again, I think it's going to last for a little while. I think then it's going to trail off and we're going to see something else, but we'll see. Anyways, I just wanted to share that with you guys. Listening to this relaxing here, great album. This is an OJC version here, just for those of you who want to know. And that's all I got for today. So leave your comments, guys. I like hearing what you have to say, and I just thought this would be a fun video to throw out there, and just talk a little bit about where we are right now with the state of the reissue. Is this the golden age of the reissue? I think we probably are at the high point of it. Anyway, happy listening to you guys. Got more record reviews coming up. Stay tuned.